It's been a long time. I was kind of thinking about this. If Jacob Zuma's criminal trial does get underway and is completed, and there is a guilty verdict, and he accepts it, or there's a not guilty verdict and the NPA accepts that, and there are no more challenges, what on earth am I going to find to chat to Karyn Maughan about? We'll have to find something, won't we, Karyn?
Oh, I do many other things. I know everyone thinks this is my life, but
I
I'm an
know.
interesting individual outside the Jacob Zuma trial, I promise.
um, how unprecedented is this application where the state is asking the High Court in KwaZulu-Natal to compel the trial to proceed regardless of further appeals and applications?
Well, it's not the usual thing at all, but, the interesting thing is that we have had this pathology with the National Prosecuting Authority where essentially any legal attack that's mounted by the accused before the trial gets underway is sort of tolerated, and even midway through the actual trial, and can then lead to extraordinarily long levels of delay. And we've seen that, in the asbestos case, it has actually been named after Jacob Zuma, the Stalingrad approach that his then lawyer, Kemp J. Kemp, had said he would pursue in 2007. But the state, as my understanding is that they actually got legal advice quite some time ago that said in the instance where accused people were bringing reviews of the NPA's decision to prosecute them, he said, get the people to then interdict the state from proceeding with its case and proceed with the case anyway. And the NPA did not follow that advice, but in this instance with Downer, given the strength of the rulings that were made in response to the to the challenge to that private prosecution that was launched against him and myself, I think the NPA feel very emboldened to pursue this kind of application because the courts saw that private prosecution as the ultimate embodiment of the so-called Stalingrad approach, and said this is essentially him doing the exact same thing so he can get rid of Downer and avoid his trial.
Is there anything in our post-1994 jurisprudential history that would give some sort of clue as to how a High Court, and if the the KZN High Court says yes to the NP's application, Jacob Zuma will appeal that to the to the Supreme Court of Appeal and then to the Constitutional Court. But is there anything in the last 35 years of jurisprudence in South Africa that would guide the Con Court when they eventually consider this and give them the legal standing to say, you're right, any further appeals must be decided after the finding of the court?
Well, essentially what the state is saying is that the courts have actually come down very hard on what they describe as midstream appeals. They said, look, if you are convicted, you can appeal on this particular point that you're unhappy about when you appeal your conviction. But ultimately, there is a constitutional prerogative that the courts and the justice system need to serve the interests of all South Africans, not the narrow interests of one accused person who for many years has used state funding to pursue every possible challenge to the prosecution against him. And now in this later season where that state funding has been cancelled, and of course the High Court this week will have to decide on whether it grants that order from the presidency and the state attorney that they're seeking, that an order is given that money, Jacob Zuma must now pay back that money. But that there's been this pathology of not just bringing applications, but when you lose, and there's finality after multiple appeals, you essentially raise the same arguments again, which he's done very much in his continued campaign against Downer. And I think the state is saying that given that history, and they provide like a timeline, I mean, it's detailed, it's 18 years, 6 months of this pathology of just fighting on every street, in every corner, in every house, that it has gotten to the point where the court needs to intervene. They are not taking Jacob Zuma's rights away from him. He can raise the arguments that he continues to raise, but he must raise them within the context of the criminal trial and allow the state to lead its witnesses. And I think that, it obviously will have implications for Zuma's trial, but it could very well have quite profound implications for the administration of justice in South Africa in general, and this pathology of well-resourced litigants essentially evading, delaying, and preventing their trials from going ahead with multiple futile court cases. And that's actually what this case is about. It's not just about Jacob Zuma.
Okay. The Concourt doesn't like it when direct approaches are made to the Concourt rather than making their way through the lower courts. Is there a case to be made for a direct approach to the Constitutional Court on this one, given the fact that it's a fairly important legal matter and is headed there anyway?
Well, I think what will probably happen, and I mean, I can't speak for the NPA, is that the NPA is, if it succeeds in this application, which of course is going to, cause ructions either way, it can then apply for an enforcement order in the High Court. The High Court will then potentially grant that enforcement order, and which will then immediately result in an automatic appeal, very quick appeal to the SCA. I mean, that was the scenario with the invalidation of the private prosecution. And once that enforcement order is in place, I mean, Jacob Zuma has shown very little respect for enforcement orders in the context of the private prosecution, but the NPA will feel legally emboldened to say, this order is enforced, you can appeal, you can carry on, but we are continuing with this trial. And that is when I think the rubber is really going to hit the road. There's a huge, even in the responses that I've received to the stories, some of which have, as you can imagine from Jacob Zuma supporters, been quite intense. People have, there's been this suggestion that if Jacob Zuma is forced to go on trial, KZN will burn. And that has been like the insinuation throughout. And it's a very much a culture within the KZN legal environment, which is where Jacob Zuma has scored his biggest legal victories. But, ultimately this is going to be another moment, like it was with the Constitutional Court and the state capture inquiry, where South Africa and its legal system is really going to question whether it is genuinely here for the interests of all South Africans, or whether it is simply beholden to the interests of politically powerful people.
Karyn Maughan, thank you very, very much indeed.